Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We have big breaking news tonight of yet another close Trump associate arrested and charged with crimes of corruption. And his name is Tom Barrack. He is a billionaire businessman. He is accused of illegally lobbying Donald Trump on behalf of the United Arab Emirates. Prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York today unsealing a huge 7-count, 46-page indictment. We're going to go through it. We've got a reporter who's reporting on this. But this is a very important development for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which because when we last met here at this desk last night, we were talking about the fate of the rule of law in the era of Donald Trump, and particularly in the period where the Justice Department changed hands from Attorney General William Barr and then the final days of the Trump administration, the lackey Jeff Rosen, to Joe Biden's new Attorney General Merrick Garland. And last night here on this program, we were critical of the fact the Justice Department had, according to reporting, declined to prosecute Trump's Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. That was according to reporting from both the Associated Press and government executive. Now, that decision not to prosecute came after the Commerce Department's own Inspector General found that Ross had lied to Congress about a citizenship question that he wanted to add to the 2020 census. We have an important update to that story. The AP and government executive have both issued corrections, clarifying that, in fact, it was the Trump Justice Department that made the decision not to prosecute Ross, not the Biden administration, which is, of course, a very, very big difference. It is also right in line with the themes that we were talking about generally last night about the rule of law in the Trump era and what is to be done about the criminal enterprise that was the Trump administration. Because, keep in mind, this is an astounding fact, but it's true. Wilbur Ross is the fifth member of Donald Trump's cabinet who is referred to Justice Department prosecutors. The fifth. And in all cases, all five, the DOJ decided not to prosecute. The first was former Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke, who was involved in multiple scandals, including chartering expensive jets and getting involved in the land deal in his home state of Montana. There was former Secretary of Labor Alex Acosta, who infamously gave sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart plea deal when he was U.S. Attorney in Florida. There was former Secretary of Veterans Affairs Robert Wilkie. Remember him? Remember how he questioned the credibility of a veteran who reported being sexually assaulted at a VA hospital? And then, who could forget Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's spouse, also the former Transportation Secretary, who allegedly directed staff to do personal work for her and her father. The Trump Department of Justice declined to prosecute all of those people, which brings us to today's news. Astonishingly, yet another high-level Trump associate, a key figure from the Trump campaign, was arrested and charged with serious crimes. As I mentioned earlier, his name is Tom Barrack. You may remember him from his utterly cringeworthy bad wedding toast speech at the 2016 Republican National Convention when he was a major fundraiser for the Trump campaign. He helped convince Donald Trump to hire his old friend, a chap by the name of Paul Manafort, as campaign manager. And after Trump won the election, Barrack became chair of the inaugural committee. You may also remember that because that committee, of course, was later investigated and charged with misusing funds to enrich Trump's family business. Barrack was also a frequent promoter of the then president-elect, going on TV to praise his brilliance.
The man is brilliant. So what he did last night, the foreign community had no idea who this man is. I can tell you for sure, last night the cables were flying, saying this president-elect is so much better, so much more thoughtful, so much more culturally adept than anybody thought.
I'm sorry. I hadn't actually seen the clip. I just read the transcript. It's even better when he delivers it. That was 2 days before the inauguration, after Trump ruffled some feathers for calling NATO obsolete. But Tom Barrack's background isn't actually in politics or public relations. It's in private equity and real estate investment around the world. And Barrack has extensive business and personal links to the Middle East. Well, today he was arrested on federal charges, a 7-count indictment accusing him of acting as an unregistered agent of the United Arab Emirates. Prosecutors say that Barrack inserted language into a draft speech for then-candidate Trump that praised an Emirati official, also allegedly repeatedly promoted the UAE and its foreign policy interests during media appearances after soliciting direction from officials. Barrack and his two co-defendants, according to the indictment, acted to aid the UAE in its dealings with the executive branch of the U.S. government, agreeing to advocate for the appointment of individuals favored by the UAE in the new administration. These charges are a result of a nearly 3-year investigation by federal prosecutors and the FBI. They are especially notable because they appear to be an example of the Department of Justice doing the right thing, which is to say going wherever the facts and law lead them and bringing a case against a very powerful and high-profile person, just as we were advocating for last night. It is also amazing to just take a step back and marvel at the growing rap sheet of Trump world, right? The Law and Order guy, remember him? Yeah. In addition to Tom Barrack, there is his friend Paul Manafort, former Trump campaign manager, convicted of tax and bank fraud, and then pardoned by Trump. There is Steve Bannon, former chief strategist and senior counselor of the president, who was arrested on the yacht of a Chinese billionaire, accused of swindling Trump supporters, and never had to stand trial because he was also pardoned. There is Roger Stone, fixture and advisor to Trump, convicted by a jury of his peers of lying to Congress, and then pardoned. There's Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer and fixer, who pleaded guilty to charges of tax fraud and campaign finance violations. There's Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, who pleaded guilty to lying to investigators and was also pardoned by Trump. Rick Gates, former Trump campaign deputy chairman and inaugural official, who pleaded guilty to charges of conspiracy and making false statements. There is, of course, Donald Trump himself, whose business is now facing tax evasion charges that are brought by the Manhattan District Attorney, and whose former CFO is facing those charges as well. Truly a remarkable situation when you add it all up.